Lawyers slash cops of Reddit, what is the stupidest thing you've seen someone do to cover up a crime? Story 1. Client was embezzling money from his engineering firm. Client actually had the money he had embezzled in his possession and could still return the money. He would have faced penal liability, but we could have pleaded him out to have served no more than a few months of probation. Under his circumstance, prison time was unlikely. Client does not believe our advice. Client believes he is going to prison. Client believes his best course of action is to return to his country of birth, Iran. The United States strictly prohibits transfer of technology which can be used for nuclear programs to Iran. I explain this all to client. Client tries to board a flight to Iran. In his luggage is a programmable logic controller his firm had been subcontracted with the federal government to develop. I don't know why he was taking this PLC with him, but it was there when he was pulled off the airplane in Stuttgart and taken into custody. Client is now facing up to 20 years in federal prison for espionage and unlawful transfer of classified military technology to a hostile power. People, listen to your fucking lawyers.
Comment 1. So were the feds looking for him, or did they get an anonymous tip? Also, once your client decides to leave the country and possibly take their knowledge/tech over to foreign powers, particularly those that are not friendly to the U.S., would that affect the attorney-client privileges? And no. Comment 2. He didn't tell us he was going to take a PLC with him, and he didn't say he was fleeing the country. He told us he wanted to visit his mother-in-law. We advised him that he was traveling to a country which the federal government has tech-sharing restrictions. Basically, if anyone asks about what you do, shut the fuck up. Would that affect the attorney-client privileges? Attorney-client privilege can be rendered moot when communications between an attorney and client are themselves used to further a crime. Here, since the client did not tell us they were going to sneak a PLC out of the country, we did not help the client further their crime because we had no knowledge of client's intent. Accordingly, we would be able to assert such a privilege during discovery.
Story 2. I knew a chick who robbed a house. She was house-sitting for silverware and jewelry. She pawned it off at the closest pawn shop to the house, so she was caught right away. However, being the dope fiend she was, she poured bleach all over the house to get rid of her fingerprints. Instead of petty theft, she ruined the stairs and all the hardwood floors and paint on the walls, and ended up with damages exceeding $10,000 if I remember correctly, which launched her well into new legal territories. Story 3. Katrina destroyed my cousin's house, so we took her in at just 21 years old. My cousin was an alcoholic and addicted to cocaine. This only came to light because she'd been stealing bottles of wine from the local gas station across the street. We found out because the same family had run the gas station for 30 years, and the grandpa character was very, very good friends with my father. He actually called him out of concern. Tracy has been stealing wine. A lot of wine. At first, I think she is a rebellious young girl. I did not call the police because I respect your family, but I worry for her and cannot afford for her to take any more for free. Story 4. To all the shoplifters who think you're smooth, keep in mind, grocery stores know what angle to put camera at to perfectly capture people stuffing things in their pockets or down the front of their shirts. And in many stores, those cameras are higher quality than you'd think they'd be. I've had files where I can make a continuous film following someone around the store and out the door, then cross-reference the timestamp with the store receipts to show you paid for the mac and cheese, but not the 3 steaks in your pants. I can't believe I went to school for 7 years for this.
Comment 1. Some stores will also let you walk out and come back. You think they just caught you lifting $30 worth of cloths, but they have been saving these videos up to the point where the value makes it a felony. Comment 2. XLP here, we do this all the time. Regulars think they're getting away with it every time till they get comfortable. Once we have enough cases that reach felony theft amounts, we arrest them. The look on their faces when they think we only caught them with a few hundred in merchandise, only to hear they're being charged with several thousand instead, is one of my favorite parts of the job. Comment 3. That sub was pretty entertaining. It was a sort of Mos Eisley where criminals and their pursuers could pause and have a conversation. I discovered that more than a few shoplifters were former LP. It seemed that there are 2 basic categories of shoplifter. people who stole necessities they could not afford. These people stop as soon as they have enough income. People who stole because it gave them a thrill. These people never stop until they get caught. It was a fascinating window into the human psyche. Comment 4. I was once stopped walking out of a supermarket with a 36-inch TV. I presented my receipt and expressed my surprise that the security guard thought there was any sort of reasonable probability that somebody would be so bold as to just walk out with something like that, but apparently people do. I mean, I can understand people thinking that they might get away with stealing something small. Comment 5. Was on the good side of this when I bought something and withdrew $40 from my debit card and forgot to take it. Went back in after about half an hour and mentioned this. The clerk took out the bill with the timestamp, and the manager and I reviewed the crystal clear, very well placed camera's footing to see that I indeed had not taken the $40.
Story 5. Not a criminal matter, but I worked on a child welfare case in which the parents were ordered to undergo hair follicle testing for drug use. So the father, not my client thankfully, shaved off all the hair from his body, even his eyebrows. But he said it had nothing to do with the drug testing, it's just something he wanted to do. I think the kid ended up with relatives, in case you were wondering.
Comment 1. A neighbor of mine in college had landed a good engineering internship which required hair follicle testing. They didn't tell him this until late in the process, and this guy smoked a ton of pot. He immediately told them that he competes in triathlons and didn't have any hair on his body. To provide proof, this kid immediately signed up for 3 triathlons throughout the state of Ohio taking place over the next few weeks. He blew through money on gas and put up some of the saddest race results in recorded history, but he earned my lifelong admiration for diving headfirst into this con job. Comment 2. He was afraid that the employer would call him out. Just looked him up on Facebook. The stoner from Ohio grew up to be a chemical engineer in Germany. Next beer I have is going out to Drew, the triathlete, and, of course, Paul Walker. Comment 3. Oh, man. I work on child welfare cases, and the stuff people do is so absurd. Most of them take the road of yelling and/or writing their congressman about unethical conduct when they get called out on their nonsense. I saw one parent come into court in handcuffs from a situation that started with a simple report that her kiddo had an abscessed tooth that wasn't receiving attention. Most of those cases are fairly straightforward. The social worker talks to the parent, usually finds out the parent can't afford treatment, they get them hooked up with dental care assistance, ask if they need anything else, go about their merry way, and close the case. Well, the social worker showed up at the house because the phone number in the report was disconnected. Parent threw a rock at the social worker through the front window, yelled that no one was home, grabbed the child, ran out the back door, sprinted down the street, and hid in someone's dog pen until the police found them. And then she tried to attack the police officer with feces and a stick and threatened to kill them as they hauled her off to jail. She was guilty of much more extensive abuse than the report was for. Last I heard, the kiddo was adopted by her aunt and uncle. Comment 4. At the same time? Like a stick in one hand, feces in the other? Or one after the other, throw the feces and then attack with the stick while they're busy checking themselves for feces? Or maybe she put the feces on the stick first? So many questions left unanswered.
Story 6. There was a guy who went to his buddy's house after nearly beating his girlfriend to death. Police end up showing up to the house where the guy was. Friend answers, and buddy shows up behind the guy, not wearing a shirt. This is important. Police say who they're looking for, and both men say they don't know who that person is. Here's the kicker. The guy that's shirtless? Who beat his girlfriend half to death? He has his first initial and last name in a big bold tattoo across his chest. Story 7. Not either of the specified parties, but I work alongside both. There was this story a while back about a murder that just baffled me. This lady's husband had a fight with her, and then disappeared. She said he went to Florida, angry, and told her to sell all of his stuff and get a divorce. So she sold all his stuff, the house, etc. I think she may have gotten the divorce too, simply because he was unavailable for contact at any time. No emails, calls, etc. were answered. Of course, there were suspicions of foul play. Nothing came of them for a while, though. The lady sells their marital home and buys a house in a slightly more upscale part of town. After something like 7 years, the cops finally get to search the place. They found her husband in the closet. She had chopped him up into pieces, put those pieces into Tupperware containers, and wrapped those containers in alternating layers of scented trash bags and dryer sheets, along with air freshener beads, in order to keep anyone from smelling him. Why the hell would you hang on to dead husband bits for so long? We live by the sea. She could have just pitched them out there at any time, and bam, nobody knows. Story 8. The actor/director, Adrienne Shelley, was in her apartment when a guy broke in to rob the place. He punched her, knocking her out. Thinking he killed her, he tried to make it look like she committed suicide by hanging her in the bathroom. Turned out she didn't die from the punch, but she did die from the hanging. Dude could have just gotten charged with B&E and assault. Instead, he got convicted of murder. Story 9. A guy the first worked with was being charged with dangerous driving, following a pursuit involving a police helicopter. He would have faced a fine and 1-year driving ban. His lawyer told him to plead guilty. He ignored this advice and insisted on going to trial, and his sole defense was that the police didn't have any kind of video recording proof of his crime, as though this was some kind of technicality that would get him off. In questioning, he even admitted to what he did, but still tried to convince the court that he was not guilty because there's no video recording. The court threw everything at him, everything bar a prison sentence, got a suspended one instead. The arresting police officer even told him he would just got a telling off had he stopped, but his insistence on trying to play the system ended up majorly screwing him over. Story 10. This more of a failure to cover up, but I had a client who drove across the country to try to collect a drug debt. The police found the handwritten budget he had made for the trip. Items 1 and 2 were gun and bullets.
Comment 1. Can't go wrong with an organized hitman. Maybe he could claim that in his taxes? Comment 2. You know, they literally have a handbook for how to collect taxes after an apocalyptic situation, right? I've read that before a few times, but I'm technologically stupid and don't know how to link sources. Someone maybe toss a source or prove me wrong? I'm not sure it's true. I've just read it multiple times, and I believe it.
Story 11. Just happened last night. I work in a college town. Around 2:30, the bar is close, and the parade of drunk students commences. Kid had 1 traffic cone on each arm, and 1 on his head, walking jauntily down the main drag. As soon as I pulled up next to him, he started doing the robotic drunk guy acting sober walk. Carefully put the cones down on the sidewalk and kept walking as though nothing had happened. Forgot about the 1 on his head, though. Story 12. I dealt with a guy once who had burned his parents' garage down. He had been drink driving, hit a cyclist, and hurt them. Driving ban, fine. Maybe a suspended prison sentence, given he had never been in trouble before. He was only 19 years old, but in his drunk mind he decided that police couldn't prove he had been drink driving if there was no car. But he had parked the car back at home in the garage, so he fucking well set the garage on fire with a can of petrol. Destroyed the garage, the car, the side of the house, the mobile home parked on the driveway, and a large proportion of his neighbor's garden. Still got charged with drink driving, amongst other things. Story 13. A female distant family member got involved with an older guy, and together they kidnapped the guy to rob him, stole his car, murdered him, and then drove to a remote place where they doused the car in gas and lit it on fire. The boyfriend got burned on his hands. They arrested the girlfriend when she was shoplifting bandages and burned salve from the drugstore. The whole thing fell apart from there. They may have gotten away with it if she had bought the stuff for under $10. Story 14. Well, according to the full confession I got to read as part of the arraignment papers, someone allegedly got all his co-conspirators and accessories to agree to penetrate the dead girl's vagina, post-mortem to be redundantly clear, with a makeshift dildo, and then pour bleach all over her genital region. The idea was to make it seem as though the murder had been subsequent/consequent to a rape, which it hadn't actually been, which the perpetrators had then attempted to cover up by destroying any lingering physical evidence. You know, to throw people off the trail. If that doesn't sound quite logical to you, congratulations. You might not be an unmedicated schizophrenic with terrible taste in friends.
Comment 1. So his idea to cover up the murder was to frame himself for rape without actually doing anything to cover up the murder? Comment 2.
Story 15. Ding ding ding. I hate to ruin my own story by admitting that I'm cherry-picking, but, well, I am. They did actually do some other stuff afterwards that wasn't quite as stupid. But then a few days later, they confessed. So it was a real roller coaster of an evidence packet to read through. This is basically my one never pay for drinks ever again story that applies to virtually every situation where somebody wants to know something crazy about the legal profession. The one major area it's missing is motion/trial practice. To be honest, I don't have a motion/trial practice case that's nearly as good. I do have one drawn-out probation violation rehearing that involves shy bladder syndrome as a crucial element, and one trial where myself, the prosecutor, and the judge all got stopped dead in their tracks simultaneously because a witness insisted he had no recollection of testifying under oath in front of the grand jury, which he had, and I had the transcripts. Story 16. I wasn't a cop or a lawyer at the time, I was 8, but I think you guys will love this story. My mom worked at a school for teenage boys. One day, one of them decided he was going to buy a pound of plastic explosives from the internet, using the school computers. Then, for good measure, he fesses up to my mom when the rumors go round that there's some kind of bomb at school. Now, my mother knew that this boy was not malicious in any way, just an idiot with too much money on his hands. So she calls up the chemistry teacher, who was Polish and rotund, and had already been in trouble several times for exploding things in his classroom. Dr. Explosia decides that the best course of action is to smuggle the explosives and the idiot student out of the school, take him to a field that the student's family owned, and perform a controlled detonation. He said I could come along too, since I was an 8-year-old that loved explosions and seen people get in trouble. So anyway, the stupidest thing I've seen someone do to cover up a crime is tell everybody in authority what they did and then explode the evidence with an 8-year-old as a witness. Story 17. My nephew robbed a liquor store during a snowstorm in the middle of the night. He didn't have a car, so he had to walk. All the cops had to do was follow his footprints back to his house. He also stole $500 from my parents and hid the money in his ass. He was the only person in the house during the crime, so it couldn't have been anyone else. My parents demanded the return of the money, and he complied. That was a pretty shitty thing to do. Story 18. There was an Indian guy who burned his daughter's apartment building down because she was living with a guy from a lower caste or something in the Chicago suburbs. He threw the gas can he used in the dumpster right next to the building. It had his name on it. Story 19. He was carrying a small butterfly knife, which is illegal. He tried to hide it by swallowing it.
Had to lean him forwards and frantically hit him on the back to dislodge the damn thing as he turned blue. It is like a $100 fine, and you lose the knife. So he ended up in much more trouble, but in the end he got off with a larger fine and a real talking to from a judge. Bloody twit.
Story 20. My sister is a sergeant LEO that used to work in robbery. She shows up to court to be present for the case where a guy is on trial for robbing a bank. They have him on camera, and he wants to represent himself, no lawyer. His opening line is, "Yes, Your Honor, I'd just like to point out that you can't tell that was me on camera because I was wearing a hat. Yay, that was a fast trial." Story 21. My ex-boyfriend started beating me in front of 4 of my friends, and after they pulled him off of me, he called the police on them for assault. Story 22. Not a cop or lawyer, but a few months ago my friend called me asking for advice. She was with a friend of hers, and they had weed on them, and for an unrelated reason got into an altercation with local police. The cops were coming to her car, so she told her friend to hide the weed in her pants. The girl puts the bag of weed in her underwear, I guess, and when the cops came, they could smell weed and were pretty much like, "All right, guys, just give it up." But they were both vehemently denying they had anything on them, and one of the cops was all, "What's sticking out of your pants?" And the girl argues that she's on her period and it's her pad. Woman face-palming. She was wearing leggings, and it was obvious. They clearly didn't buy it and could see something stuffed there, and after about 20 minutes of arguing, they were pretty much like, You either take it out now or we arrest you, go downtown, and strip search you. The girl got a weed ticket.
Comment 1. Cops must have had some time to kill. There was only one end result that was going to happen. Surprised that it took 20 minutes to get there. Also, if the cops have called you out on BS in this scenario and your worst case is a fine, just take it and move on with your life. You're not going to pull an Obi-Wan on the cops where they wander away confused and you get away scot-free.
Story 23. This doesn't fit in strictly with the question asked, but I once knew a woman going to Crown Court for charges of theft, benefit, and credit card fraud, and she paid for the taxi to her hearing with a stolen credit card of one of the victims and still pled innocent. Yay, she went to prison. Story 24. Small town in Arkansas. The pharmacy is in a rock building with a tin roof. Some guys who steal shit figure out with a crowbar they'd get right in. And they were right. So they threw the drugs into the back seat instead of the trunk. They stopped to get gas and are just about to be on their way. A state trooper is headed to the same station to take a leak and get coffee. The guys play it cool. They start the car and floor it. Burned rubber nearly crashed getting on the highway. Being an experienced trooper, this sparked his curiosity, so he hits the lights and begins pursuit. Finally gets them stopped, and once he sees the pile of pill bottles, he has some idea about what may be going on. Hauls them to the county jail, and is inventorying everything when the sheriff says the local pharmacist is on the phone, so he may as well talk to him. Pharmacist wants to report a burglary. Trooper asks did they take, and begins reading the inventory. Pharmacist says, "That sounds right." Trooper says, "Well, I think I solved it." Story 25. Obligatory, not a cop or anything, but a clever ruse that 8 to 10-year-old me would go off without a hitch. It was the school holidays, and I was up late playing video games when I decided I was thirsty. Wandered over to the fridge to find there was nothing to drink except the beers my dad kept in the fridge. So what do? I have me a beer, but then realize he's going to notice when there's one less bottle out of the 6 or so already in there, so I start panicking. Decide the best idea is to fill the empty bottle back up with fucking water and put it back in the fridge with the lid screwed back on as best I could. About a week later, my dad hit me up about, obviously, fake beer, and I just claimed ignorance until he couldn't contain his laughter at how stupid the whole situation was. I cried and we moved on as a family. Story 26. Client was accused of embezzling millions from a company. This was simply false. The company owner had been hiding it from a spouse. The owner's lawyer called me up to extort my client and told me that if our client testified as to facts XYZ in support of his defense in the divorce, that they would appreciate it. If my client would not perjure herself, they would have her prosecuted. I recorded the attorney and filed a transcript along with a motion with the court. The judge brought down the hammer and he was professionally disciplined by our state licensing authority for attorneys. Story 27. This is a true story. When I was in ADA, a colleague of mine had a case where a couple of guys robbed a jewelry store. The police showed up and there was chase. They all split up and all got caught, but one of them had a bit of head start. Apparently, he ran into a beauty salon and started yelling that he needed to dye his hair immediately, and then the police ran in after him. Oh, and there was also the guy who stole jewelry out of someone's house and shoved it up his ass when he got caught. They found it during the strip search because some of it was still hanging out. Finally, there was a guy wanted to for murder. He had a long ponytail, and a few days after the murder, he cut it off and got his head shaved. When he was arrested, he still had the ponytail in his pocket. Story 28. When I was young and dumb, this girl we had staying with us had walked up to the store and called the police on me for hitting her. Although I did not hit her, I fell a bit backwards when I got up because I was drunk. I was 19. I went and hid in an empty storage locker in the basement, but got worried I was going to get caught there, so I went and hid behind a door. Of course, the first place cops look when they go into a room is behind the door. Then I tried to resist, ended up getting carried out with one cop on each arm. As we approached a door that led to the stairs out of the building, I decided to try to push off the door to try to get the cops to fall backwards. I got maced instead, and an added charge of resisting. I would have probably just got a MIP, but I made it much worse. Story 29. The police suspected a woman to have something to do with drugs, so they kept an eye on her. They used the same car for 2 weeks. Woman noticed it and called the police because she thought she had a stalker. So 2 police officers visited her, and found the cannabis she was growing in her house, which is illegal here. Tip for growing cannabis: do not call the police to your house. Tip for stakeouts: do not use the same car for 2 weeks, especially in an area where there are not too many cars parked on the street.
Comment 1. This is sometimes done on purpose. Nothing is stupider than a junkie who is paranoid that someone is following them. The things is, they are often paranoid for no reason, so it can be that no one takes them seriously. In my shady past, I had an acquaintance drop by all of a sudden and told he has had the same car following him for days. Sure enough, the car he described parked in the street in front of my place. And what does this genius want to do? Go and dig up his stash of speed, which I knew had to be at least 250 grams or more from the forest. We have a lot of forest here near cities. One can store drugs there for years and have relatively fast access to them. There was nothing I could say to convince to go home and sleep for a couple of days. Nope. He wanted to get it before cops arrest him. There was no need for emptying the stash. It could have stayed there for weeks more. I kicked him out pretty fast, and they arrested him with the evidence a few hours later. Guess if the same car started hanging out on the parking lot across the street? Yep. They use it as a tactic too. People panic, they may not get their drugs, try to sneak out anyway. Even if the cops follow them, they still think, well, the cops can't know who I'm seeing in this house. Junkies do not think straight, and the amount of delusion and self-deception is just massive. Comment 2. When I was a kid, my mom noticed an out-of-place parked car on the street with a man sitting inside. It was a street where no one parks in the street, as the driveways are usually big enough. School's getting out soon, and mom's worried it's a predator and calls the cops. They take the info and phone back, assuring my mom not to worry. It's a private investigator on the job, never figured out who they were watching.
Story 30. Not a lawyer/cop. Saw a guy get arrested across the street from the ED. His defense was, "No, officer, I don't do drugs. This weed ain't for me. I just sell it, man." Apparently he thought selling was legal, but doing it wasn't. Moved himself up to a felony, though. Story 31. Not a cop or a lawyer. Had 2 kids I knew from high school kill a guy, chop his head off, and burn his fingers. They were caught. It was national news. The worst part? One had a house party 2 weeks before they killed the guy. He was drunk and pissed me off, so I gave him an upperdecker. A mere 2 weeks before savagely murdering somebody. Story 31. I read this police report my first week in the prosecutor's office. Still makes me laugh every time I think about it. Some guy was pulled over for having a taillight out. The police officer had no reason to suspect he had anything illegal on him. He was just going to write a ticket and be done with it. Guy is convinced that the officer knows he has heroin in the car. His idea to cover up crime of possession is to just start doing the heroin while the cop is in his car writing the ticket. Officer walks back, see the guy snorting heroin. Says, "What are you doing?" Guy replies, "Heroin." Moral of the story: don't cover up your drug possession by doing the drugs in front of a cop. Story 32. When I was in high school, we had a yearly scavenger hunt with a bunch of dumb and silly things to do, one of which was doing a fire in the hole. We did this at our local Burger King, and right after we went to the Kroger across the parking lot to continue the hunt. The police showed up not long after. We were under 18, so we just got taken to the police station and called our parents. We felt stupid for being the only group that got caught, but while we were waiting, a senior from another group came in with handcuffs on. He got naked and jumped on a car, stopped at a light in front of his car. There was a cop 2 car behind him. Also, one of the things on the hunt list was to steal a garden gnome and put it in front of the police station. So it was pretty funny seeing about 10 different gnomes with evidence tags in them while we were calling our parents. The cops got a good laugh out of it too. Edit. I should have explained a fire in the hole is ordering a drink-in drive-thru and tossing it back at them. No explosives were involved. Story 33. Lawyer here, not quite covering up a crime, but still stupid. I had a case where the other party was trying to claim that my client had no rights to a vehicle they bought together during their marriage. To support his claim, he told the judge that he was already married in another state when he married my client, thus making their marriage invalid. So it's just his truck, not hers. Not only is he incorrect legally, but he admitted, under oath, on the record, to committing a felony for which he was already under investigation. All for a beat-up old car, which the judge promptly awarded to my client. Story 34. Client finds out his 8Y/O stepdaughter is alleging sexual abuse, so he sits down with a camera recording a conversation with her 6YO sister and feeds the sister lines about how older girl is mad at him and just wants him out of the house. At trial, prosecutors bring up the much too convenient timing. Story 35. Not a cop or lawyer, but former corrections officer. We had a guy who murdered his neighbor. So after the murder, he set the apartment on fire, as well as a car, and at some point, cut off the victim's arms. He then threw the arms at first responders to the fires. Yeah, it was a weird night. Story 36. I knew a lawyer, she was not my client, who blew the statute of limitations on a low-dollar personal injury case. Instead of informing her firm, she got the client to agree to settle for $40K, faked up the settlement paperwork, and gave him $40K that she embezzled from her church. She was the treasurer. That came to light. She paid back the church. She had the money, pled out to a misdemeanor, and was disbarred. Story 37. Cop here. Truthfully, most criminals are dumb. Like, real dumb. They do stupid stuff to try and escape consequences all the time and end up making it worse. I'll give you a few examples. What would have been a ticket for theft turned into multiple felonies when a girl tried to hide her ID in a shopping bag that she used to steal stuff by stuffing it into my back seat. It was a plastic sack. They're not quiet. She had the longest criminal history I had ever seen. She gets caught a lot. Had a kid run from me in handcuffs after being picked up for a juvie probation warrant. He kicked out my back window, dove headfirst into the pavement before trying to jump a 6-foot fence. In handcuffs, he got halfway over. His shirtless half slid down the top of the fence, where I picked him up with a bajillion splinters and booked him for multiple felonies. If he'd just cooperated, he would have been home by lunchtime. I had a meth-head steal Yoo-hoo, some Twinkies, and a Red Bull from a grocery store. She had over $1,000 in her purse. Security detained her. They called us and wanted us to issue a trespass warning, don't come back for 1 year, and escort her off the property. When she saw us, she decided it'd be a great idea to try and run, pushing people away and knocking down some random soccer mom. Now, instead of a warning, we have theft plus assault plus deadly equals robbery. This was all in the last month. Story 38. I work in a jail. Walked into a housing unit that smelled weed. Followed the smell to the bathroom where there were 3 inmates standing in a corning. Dude with his back to me turns around real fast, with a fave like a 5-yo that shit his pants, and puts his hands behind his back to hide what he's holding. I tell him to show me his hands. He showed me his right hand. I told him to show me his other hand. He puts his right hand back behind his back, then shows me his left. Both hands. He shows me a joint. Story 39. I knew a couple that were the trashiest trash that existed. They made porn and did quote cam modeling for money. 3 weeks after they had a child together, the child died unexpectedly. A few weeks later, they were both arrested because the autopsy came back that the child was starved to death. Also, a good majority of porn they were selling was lactation porn, where she's spraying her dude with breast milk or pumping it into a bag to make him drink. The prosecutors went after them separately. When they asked them why they never took the kid to any doctor's appointments or checkups, the guy said it was her job to feed and take the kid to the doctor. They forgot to delete their social media accounts that show both of them basically showering in breast milk. They both got 10 years in prison. Story 40. Not a lawyer or a cop, but I was at an insurance place, and a guy smashed up his car and claimed he hit a deer, and he shoved fur in the cracks and seams that wasn't deer fur, and then in the car was his dog with the matching color fur and a big shaved spot. Ha ha. Story 41. We responded to a break and enter one time and cleared the house. We go down to speak to the caller and tell her the house was clear and the only person we found was her sleeping roommate. She looks at us puzzled and says I do have a roommate. We ran up the stairs. One other time, a guy tried to rob a money mart with a knife. Now money parent clerks are surrounded in about 5 inches of ballistic glass. Clerk says to him, "Is this a joke? Any criminal who breaks into a house or car after 4 a.m. on a Sunday." We usually have nothing to do then and are all waiting for this. You want to be a successful criminal, do the crime at 2 a.m. Saturday. Another guy walked backward up to a bar door after it was closed to break eye. He did this so he would not be seen by the camera, grabs the door and pulls, and the door handle comes off and he falls. get up and looks directly at the camera. Story 42 was on shore patrol and got a call from a town 60 miles west of the base to pick up a sailor they had in custody. Dude was 5 minutes late getting back from Cinderella Liberty, back on base by midnight, the night before. Seriously, the gate guard would probably have covered for him, but he freaked out. Police found him in the morning bloody and locked in the trunk of his car. He claimed he was beaten and robbed. Cops saw right through his story. He had wrecked his own car, beaten himself with a tire iron, and locked himself in the trunk. Charged with filing a false report and obstruction on the civilian side. Unauthorized absence, damaging government property, meaning himself, etc. on the military side. Story 43. It didn't involve police, but a funny story. Dude I know was selling cars. One of the perks he got was a demo car. He smoked a lot weed. The cherry of bone he was smoking fell off and onto the white leather seats of a luxury automobile, leaving a burn hole. To try and cover it up, he tried using white shoe polish on the burn hole. Turns out the leather seats were an off-white, and the shoe polish now looked like a streak of the wrong shade of latex paint. So now he tries to wash it off with rubbing alcohol. The shoe polish didn't come off, but the leather around it turned gray, the hole frayed and got bigger. Smoking in the car was a stupid thing to do in the first place. Everything he did made it worse. Story 44. Bank robbers thought it would be a good idea to paint their guns pink. This way, once they finished the robbery, they could wipe off the paint, and the cops would be looking for guys with pink guns. Long story short, the cops found them, and when the guys willingly gave their guns to police so they could check them, the police noticed a drop of pink paint inside the barrel of the gun, effectively assuring them that they had the right guys. Even the judge during the sentencing for one of them went, "Wait, is this the case with the pink gun?" Story 45. This guy that used to come to the bar that I work at had a history of drunkenly just being a dick to people. I guess his wife finally had enough and got a restraining order on him. He, of course, violated the terms and was put in jail. While in jail, he hired his jailmate to put a hit out on his wife. Bad idea. Because his jailmate turned him in. Needless to say, he's sitting on some pretty hefty charges now in prison. Story 46. Not a cop or lawyer, but I worked at a restaurant a few years ago, and after I had left, the owner stopped paying the employees. They all showed up one day to demand him to pay them, and the owner called the police on them for trespassing at their place of employment. The police showed up and told him he had to pay them. Place shut down the next day. That guy was such a prick. Story 47. Our friends in college had a feud going on with the upstairs neighbors. We were drinking one night, about half of us were underage, and watching the World Series. There's a knock on the door. The cops show up, and we all scatter to the bedrooms just off the main room. None of us thought to shut the bedroom door. The cops ask our friend if anyone else is in the apartment. He says no. The cops call him out, and the 21-year-olds come out from the first bedroom. Don't ask me why they hid. Cops ask again, and the soberest of the girlfriends comes out. Ask again, and just as we are all getting ready to come out of the bedroom with the open freaking door and take our tickets, the cop said, "Quiet down and have a good night." So yes, I hid from the cops in a bedroom with the door open, and it worked.